My name is Sarah and I just turned 35. I should have been celebrating my daughter Emma's 8th birthday party, watching her blow out candles surrounded by friends and laughter. Instead, I found myself standing in my kitchen at 2 a.m, staring at my brother Jake as he screamed at my crying 6-year-old son because he accidentally knocked over a glass of water. Something inside me finally exploded after years of walking on eggshells in my own home. For the past 3 years, my 32-year-old brother has been living with us, contributing nothing financially, emotionally, or practically to our household. Yet somehow, I had become the villain every time I suggested he needed to change. The moment that changed everything wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It was quiet and devastating. My son Michael looked up at me with tears streaming down his face and whispered, "Mommy, why does Uncle Jake hate me?" That's when I realized I had failed as a mother by allowing this toxic dynamic to continue for so long. If you've ever found yourself sacrificing your children's peace for the sake of keeping family harmony, if you've ever been told you're being too harsh when you're simply trying to protect your own kids, then this story is for you. Subscribe if you want to hear how I finally found the courage to choose my children over my family's dysfunction. We grew up in a middle-class suburb of Denver, Colorado. My parents, Robert and Linda, worked hard to provide for Jake and me. Dad was an accountant, Mom was a teacher. On paper, we looked like the perfect American family. But behind closed doors, Jake was always the golden child who could do no wrong. From early childhood, Jake displayed explosive anger and manipulative behavior. When he threw tantrums, my parents would cave immediately to avoid confrontation. When I tried to stand up to him, I was told to be the bigger person and show compassion for your little brother. This pattern continued through high school, where Jake barely graduated while I excelled academically. The turning point came when Dad died suddenly of a heart attack when Jake was 26. Instead of this tragedy bringing us together, it seemed to give Jake permission to completely abandon any pretense of responsibility. Mom's grief made her even more protective of her baby boy, and she began enabling his worst behaviors under the guise of helping him through his grief. 3 years ago, Jake lost his apartment due to unpaid rent. Mom convinced my husband David and me to let him stay temporarily until he got back on his feet. That temporary arrangement became permanent, and our family home became a battlefield where my children learned to tiptoe around their uncle's unpredictable moods. The first red flag should have been when Jake moved in with 2 garbage bags of clothes and immediately claimed our guest room as his permanent space. He rearranged furniture, installed a gaming setup, and began treating our home like his personal bachelor pad. When I expressed concern, Mom said, "He's family, Sarah. Family helps family." Within weeks, Jake's behavior escalated. He would sleep until noon, leave dishes everywhere, and become irritated when the children made normal kid noises. His solution was to yell at them for being annoying or too loud. My 5-year-old Emma started having nightmares. 4-year-old Michael began stuttering. The financial burden was crushing us. Jake ate our food, used our utilities, and never contributed a penny. When I calculated the costs, we were spending an extra $400 monthly on groceries alone. David and I had to cancel our family vacation and put off home repairs because we couldn't afford them anymore. Every conversation with Mom followed the same script. I would express concerns about Jake's behavior, and she would respond with phrases like, "He's been through so much. You need to be more patient, and I raised you to be more compassionate than this." Somehow, wanting my children to feel safe in their own home made me the selfish one. The most heartbreaking part was watching my children change. Emma, once bubbly and confident, became anxious and withdrawn. Michael stopped bringing friends over because he was embarrassed by Jake's outbursts. My husband David grew resentful, and our marriage began suffering under the constant stress. The breaking point built over several devastating incidents. Last October, Jake screamed at Emma for using his bathroom, making her wet herself in fear. When I confronted him, he said, "Maybe if you taught your kids some respect, I wouldn't have to discipline them." Mom's response when I called her crying was, "Well, what did Emma do to upset him?" In December, Jake broke Michael's favorite toy truck during one of his rages, claiming it was too noisy. When Michael asked him to fix it, Jake told him, "Maybe now you'll learn to put your toys away properly." I spent 2 hours that night holding my sobbing 6-year-old while he asked me why Uncle Jake was so mean to him. The financial strain became unbearable. We had spent over $15,000 supporting Jake in 3 years. I had to borrow money from my sister to pay for Emma's school supplies. David started working overtime, coming home exhausted and frustrated. Our credit cards were maxed out, and we couldn't afford basic household repairs. Jake's job searches were fictional. He would spend hours on his computer claiming to apply for positions, but I discovered he was actually gaming online. When I found dozens of rejection emails dating back months, I realized he was applying for jobs he was completely unqualified for, ensuring he wouldn't get hired while maintaining the illusion of trying. My friends began avoiding our home. My neighbor Linda told me honestly, "Sarah, we love you, but we can't bring our kids over anymore. Jake makes everyone uncomfortable." My sister refused to visit with her children after Jake snapped at her toddler for crying. I was becoming isolated, losing my support system because I couldn't protect my own children. The most devastating realization came when Emma's teacher called for a conference. Emma had been acting aggressively at school, bullying smaller children, and having emotional outbursts. The teacher asked if there were any changes at home. That's when I understood that my children were learning that yelling and intimidation were normal ways to handle frustration. The final straw came on Emma's 8th birthday. We had planned a small party with 6 friends from school. I spent days preparing, decorating, and cooking. Everything was perfect until Jake emerged from his room hungover and irritated by the children's laughter. Michael accidentally knocked over a glass of apple juice while running to show Jake a magic trick he had learned. Instead of understanding that accidents happen, Jake exploded. He screamed at my 6-year-old with a rage that was terrifying to witness. "You stupid little brat. Can't you watch where you're going? You ruin everything." Michael started crying, and Emma ran to comfort her little brother. Jake continued his tirade, telling the children they were spoiled and had no respect. The other parents at the party looked horrified. One mother quietly gathered her child and left without saying goodbye. That's when Michael looked up at me with tears streaming down his face and asked, "Mommy, why does Uncle Jake hate me?" In that moment, I saw myself through my children's eyes. I was the adult who was supposed to protect them, and instead, I was allowing someone to terrorize them in their own home. Something inside me shifted permanently. I calmly told the remaining parents that the party was over, helped clean up, and put my children to bed early. Then I sat Jake down and told him he had exactly 30 days to find somewhere else to live. Jake's initial response was predictable. He accused me of being dramatic, claimed he was just trying to teach the children discipline, and insisted that I was overreacting to a minor incident. When I remained firm, he called Mom crying, portraying himself as the victim of my unreasonable demands. Mom arrived at my house within an hour, ready to mediate and convince me to reconsider. For the first time in my adult life, I refused to engage in her manipulation. I told her calmly that my children's well-being was not negotiable, and that Jake's behavior was damaging my family. The conversation with Mom was brutal but necessary. She accused me of being heartless, of abandoning family, of being selfish and ungrateful. I reminded her that I had supported Jake financially and emotionally for 3 years, and that my children deserved better than living in fear in their own home. I immediately started researching family therapists and found Dr. Martinez, who specialized in family boundary issues. Having a professional validate my concerns gave me the strength to maintain my position when family members tried to guilt me into changing my mind. Jake moved out 3 weeks later, finding a room in a shared house across town. The change in our home atmosphere was immediate and dramatic. My children stopped walking on eggshells, their laughter returned, and they began inviting friends over again. Michael's stuttering disappeared within a month. Mom struggled with my decision for months, alternating between anger and guilt trips. However, she gradually began to see the positive changes in her grandchildren. Emma's teacher reported significant improvements in her behavior and academic performance. Michael started sleeping through the night again. David and I began rebuilding our marriage and our finances. Without the constant stress and financial drain, we were able to reconnect as a couple and as a family. We took our first family vacation in 3 years, and the joy on my children's faces reminded me why I had fought so hard for this change. Jake initially struggled with independence, but eventually found steady employment and began taking responsibility for his own life. Our relationship remains strained, but he has started therapy and is slowly learning to manage his anger. We have limited contact, always supervised and time-limited. The most important lesson I learned was that protecting my children was not negotiable, regardless of family pressure or guilt. I had spent years prioritizing other people's comfort over my children's well-being, and that pattern had to end. Today, 2 years later, my children are thriving. Emma is confident and outgoing again, and Michael has developed into a compassionate, secure little boy. They have learned that adults who love them will protect them, and that their home should be a safe space. The hardest lesson was accepting that sometimes loving your family means setting boundaries that others will perceive as harsh or unforgiving. I am no longer willing to sacrifice my children's mental health to maintain the illusion of family harmony. If you are struggling with similar family dynamics, please know that you are not selfish for protecting your children. You are not responsible for managing adults who refuse to take responsibility for their own behavior. Your children deserve a home where they feel safe, valued, and protected. The guilt may never completely disappear, but watching my children flourish in a peaceful environment reminds me daily that I made the right choice. Sometimes being a good mother means being willing to be seen as the bad guy by everyone else.